Hey guys, welcome back. So, brought home another storm responder today. And this one, you can tell, it was stored indoors. It's fairly clean and looks to be in pretty good shape. But there is a problem. There is absolutely no compression. And there's a good reason for that. What's left of this connecting rod and piston are in this bucket. So you might be wondering, how did the piston and connecting rod get in a bucket? Well, the person selling this did fully disassemble it and kind of sized up the damage and decided, he was gonna sell it. So that's how I ended up with it. He felt the need to loosely reassemble it, which is kind of unfortunate because I'm just gonna have to take it apart again. Anyway, this engine could potentially be rebuilt. Generally, they blow a hole in the side of the case here, but I'm not seeing that. Now, this wasn't disclosed until I picked it up, but apparently he already rebuilt the engine. Ran it for 12 hours, ran out of oil again, and, well, blew the rod again. So, can it be rebuilt twice? Don't know. Clearly something wasn't done right if it only lasted 12 hours. And obviously there's more damage in there now than there was before. So fortunately, I don't have to worry about that right now because I recently rebuilt this engine. So I'm gonna pull the blown engine and put this one in its place. So I'm gonna start by pulling the tank and the heat shield. And at that point, that'll give better access so I can get the power head off. And then once that's removed, it's just a couple bolts to lift that engine out of there. So you can probably see the wires on the stator look to be in excellent condition, so I don't think this power head has seen too much abuse. Anyway, I got the quick disconnect unplugged for the stator, and really to get this off at this point, it's just removing the bolts down here, getting the brushes out of the way, and then removing the 4 bolts going around the stator, 2 on top, 2 on bottom. And just for reference, that brush doesn't look so hot. It's got a decent chunk missing out of it. But anyway, I was just gonna say, take note of the wires and how this was put in. Tap side goes in, red's on the top. going to use a puller on the end housing just to apply a little bit of force to get that bearing to pop out of this end housing. Do not crank down too hard because you will break this aluminum. Just removed the rotor bolt, and this has been apart 2 times and assembled loosely. With that said, this probably, I was gonna say it won't pull off, but I can see it's wobbling. So I think we're gonna get really lucky with this one. Nice. That was one of the easier uninstalls I've ever done. Most of the bolts were finger tight, and you could see that rotor just slid off with very little effort. Anyway, before putting the rebuilt engine on, there's a few things I need to do. One of them is transferring those engine mounts over. Also, there's no bell housing on here yet, so I have an extra one. I'm just going to leave that one on there, install one here, and I want to get the tins, the storm responder tins, moved over from here onto here. And lastly, there's like this plastic weather shield that goes here, so while I'm at it, I'll throw that on as well. All right, so I'm going to attach this bell housing with a little bit of thread locker. There was some on there when these came out, about 20 foot-pounds. So I'm kind of at a roadblock here. I was about to fill the cylinder with rope, and before doing that, I was going to put this bolt in just loosely so the rotor doesn't slide off. Well, the bolt wasn't going in too well, and if you look closely here, you can probably see the threads kind of on the last ½ inch here are just destroyed. So I'm not going to force this in. I do not want to damage the threads on the crankshaft. Instead, I'm just going to buy a new bolt and wait a few days and continue this assembly. All right, the bolt's finally here, and believe it or not, it's been about 4 weeks waiting for it. So definitely ready and anxious to continue here. I'm gonna fill the cylinder with rope, lock it up, and get that rotor back on and torque it down. Okay, hopefully that's enough. So previously I think I determined the torque on the bolt should be somewhere between 20 and 25 foot-pounds. So I'm gonna bring it up to 20, see how it feels, and if it feels good, bring it up to 25. Gonna try something a little bit different. You know, I've got a lot of comments on this bolt in particular that I've installed it wrong. And it all sources from the fact that the diameter of the bolt and the shaft is different. So when you go to tighten it down, I mean, this bolt can be pretty much anywhere, and it's never perfectly center. So when I power this thing up, you just see a bolt shaking around like crazy. And I've kind of come to accept that that's just how it is. But I have got a few good comments recently. Someone mentioned putting a piece of fuel line here to act as like a shoulder. And I did try that, but the fuel line I have was too big. It actually wouldn't fit. Another commenter mentioned tape. So that's what I did here. I put electrical tape on and put just enough to make a shoulder that will snug this up. And when I tighten it down, it still may not be 100% centered, but it's going to be a lot better than nothing at all. Okay, that was 20 foot-pounds. Bring it up a little bit more. 23. 25. Okay, now for the stator. This thing is a little bit different than most setups. Usually, this end housing is attached to the stator with 2 bolts that thread through to the other side, but that's not the case with this one. So when installing it, you usually put these 2 pieces together into the bell housing. And even the bell housing is in 2 parts. There's one here and there's one over here. It's split in the middle. So I'm beginning to think that removing these 4 bolts was a mistake. There was no reason to do it. I could have just removed the 4 here and slid this whole thing out as one assembly. So I am gonna reassemble the end housing and this half of the bell housing on the bench and then slide it into place. And just for reference, this is indexed. It has this little cylinder right here. So when you put the stator on, you should be able to put it in such a way that it kind of clicks into place. So I just brought these up to 140 inch-pounds. I don't have the specs on these, but you know, it is what it is. Anyway, these bolts here, like these, I don't know the exact torque settings. I did double check these before taking them out, and I think they started turning somewhere around 120 inch-pounds, which seems a little high. Usually I tighten it to about 80 to 100. So I'm going to start with 80, and if it feels good, bring it up to 100, 120. Okay, and very important, the next step before continuing. Spark plug's still removed, so there's no compression. You want to pull the recoil over slowly, and if everything sounds good, then quickly. The reason to do that is you want to listen and make sure you don't hear that rotor making contact with the stator. And even worse, if things are really misaligned, the engine might be locked up altogether, but regardless, you don't want any contact. Okay, perfect. So I'm not going to put the same brushes on that I pulled off because that chip is pretty bad. I do have another set that are used, but in much better shape than the ones that came off of there. Now remember, the tab side goes in. Red was on the top. I don't think it matters, but we'll put it back the way it was. So that's pretty much it for down here. The only thing left is this green wire here, which is attached to the end housing. And this is attached right here to the frame. So I'm gonna do that now, and I'll turn you back on in a second to finish this thing up. So I'm gonna return the spring back into the 5th hole here. That's the factory position. I moved it a little bit further out, mostly just to decrease the spring tension. Right now, the engine, if I started it, would be at 2,700 RPM because of that. I also bent the tab a bit, so putting this back to the 5th position will return, you know, the governor sensitivity to where it should be. It's also going to increase the spring tension. So the RPM should be closer to 3,200 RPMs, maybe 33, and then I'll bend the tab to get the rest of the way. Okay, I think we're ready for contact. So I got the shop tank hooked up as well as a load. So I want to get this thing going and check a few things. First, I guess, how does it sound? You know, after rebuilding it, I had a few concerns. One was the engine speed was a bit unsteady, but I think that's because that flywheel is most likely undersized and the rotor wasn't installed. So I want to see that that is kind of stabilized. The other issue is too, it was rattling a lot between this tin and this tin, and it sounded a lot like knocking, which I hope it wasn't. But I did swap out this tin here. It seems to be a tighter fit. I also put the spring back to where it was. So the engine speed is going to be faster and a little bit less vibration. I want to see how the engine sounds. And assuming it sounds good, makes power, I am going to need to bend this tab a bit to get it up to 60 hertz. Now, this isn't going to be an extended test because I don't have the heat shield installed yet for the stator, but just want to verify those few things. And if all checks out, you know, bring it back and finish it up. Well, there's good news and bad news, and I think you can tell what the bad news is, but the good news is the power head seems to work fine. The bad news is that noise, the knock, that I was convinced earlier were the tins where they meet right here, it's not. So obviously I've taken the recoil off and rotated the engine manually. And let me show you the noise I'm talking about. So not too loud, but I think that is a knock. Now, potentially it is the valves. the valves are pretty noisy on this thing. So I'm gonna take the push rods out and try this test again, but I don't think it's the valves. Pretty sure that is a knock. Sounds a lot quieter. I'm gonna rotate the engine with a drill, see if we get any kind of a loud noise. All right, well, I think that's good news. That noise is gone. Tells me the connecting rod, crankshaft, piston, the pin on the piston, probably okay. It's most likely the cam or the follower. So, not that I'm in a rush to tear this apart again. This was supposed to be a repower video on an engine I previously rebuilt, but it looks like I'm gonna have to kind of go back to square one here. So I'm gonna pause the video for quite a while, get the power head off, get this engine opened back up, and take a closer look at the intake follower as well as the crankshaft. Sorry, camshaft. It didn't take too long to get back to ground zero here, but this is the tappet in question, and you can see there is some wear on it. I actually can't feel this at all. So it's probably not the tappet, but I do have a new one, which I'm gonna put in anyway. The next thing I checked was actually just putting this in and seeing if that was egged out at all, like if this was wobbling. And it's not, it's a good fit. So I don't think we have an issue with the block. Also, the cam itself, another possibility is that, down here it's egged out, and every time it goes to push the valve, the cam is kind of moving around, but that also comes back good. It doesn't move down there at all, so I think the cam's okay. This is the lobe here in question. I mean, it feels fine. Don't really see any issues going on here with the lobe on the cam. So I think we're good as far as the cam goes. So I'm gonna put this back together with the new lifter, which is this one right here. Potentially even on the old lifter, it could be something as simple as, this area here being a little bit chewed up. So, while I'm in here, put the new lifter in, close it back up. I'm not gonna torque anything down. I also have a new push rod. I'm gonna put that in as well. And if it's still noisy, maybe I'll just replace the whole rocker altogether. But we'll start with this and see how we make out. Well, things aren't going very well. I've got a lot of tools on the bench. I've actually taken and reassembled the valve train several times now. And I did put the new tappet in, new push rod, still made the noise. I then put in a different tappet on the exhaust side and different push rod, no change whatsoever. I even swapped out the camshaft at one point, no change. The valve train is just noisy. I think I'm chasing my tail on this one. And the noise is definitely down here, so replacing the rockers really isn't going to do anything. The fact is, this engine is probably junk. I've been looking at some other videos of Briggs running just to kind of reassure myself I'm making the right decision in here. And I'll throw a couple clips up right now of a healthy engine and what it sounds like. And then here's a clip of this engine. And I hope it comes through, but this thing's making a lot of noise. And I'm kind of in denial, but I think it's a bigger issue. You know, it's either the crankshaft journal or the cylinder. Could be something as simple as the wrist pin. But I guess the point is, to fix this, I'd have to dig in further and find the exact issue. And regardless, 200 bucks for a new crankshaft. Maybe I need to get this board. What, 100 bucks? Oversized piston, 50 bucks. You can see where I'm going with this. It's not worth the investment to chase this any further. So I'm gonna conclude the video here on a bit of a sad note. You know, this engine, I think, is just gonna be a parts engine. I can't sell this to someone. So I'm gonna conclude the video at this point, and I wanna say I hope this helps someone, but regardless, you know, this is a learning experience for me and probably for others. It's not as easy as you think to rebuild an engine just by replacing the broken parts. You really need to measure everything very carefully and make sure it is perfect. And in this case, it's not. There's something wrong. So I'm just gonna put this on a shelf, pick parts from it, and at least we have a good power head on to pick from. It's a lot easier to find an engine that works on a generator that's not making power than it is the other way around. So I don't think it'll be too long before I can get another engine and kind of make the follow-up to this video, putting that storm responder together. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.